Hey, what's going on, guys? It's right here. So with our lesson 3 in writing your first Laravel application. So let's head over to lesson 3. And our lesson 3 is so the goal of this tutorial was to create a blog. And so we go ahead and create a few blog posts. Let's try to define the structure of our posts. Like you can see, first of all, our post will have a category, right? Then we have the posts, and each post will have an ID, a user ID. This is the person who created the post, and then a category ID, so the category where the post belongs to. And then you have the title, and then the body, and then active. It's just a flag to show that whether the post is active or not, so that when you don't want a post to appear, you want to write a post but you don't want it to appear on the site yet, you can turn this to false. Yeah, so we'll see how to do that. So first of all, we just want to create and write our migrations. Like we said earlier, if you're going to create a migration in Laravel, you simply do PHP artisan make migration, then create categories table. And then the next thing after creating the categories migration, and then I create a post migration like that. I just copy this and then come to my command line and I paste that. Cool. And then I run it also. So once after you run those two commands, if you go check your database migrations, and you can see now you have the categories, and then you have posts. Yeah, so it's important to have your categories migrations first and then posts because of constraints, database constraints, as we shall see. Right, so now that we need to add new table columns, but before we do this, we need to revisit a few things about database column types. For instance, we have for the categories we have ID, title, and then active. So ID is an auto incrementing ID, integer, and then we have the title, which is a string, and the active, which is a boolean, like that. So good enough for us though. Laravel has support for most column types that you'll ever need, so you can check out the documentation for more. Yeah, there's so many simple and complex column types that you can check out on the Laravel documentation. So the way you go about this is you already have the boilerplate defined, so you only need to use the table object and then call a method. If you need a string, you call the string method, and then you enter the name of the column, right? If it's a boolean, table, and then boolean, the name of the column, and then a default value of something, and then like that, and then times. So the others are already defined by default, so you don't need to do that. The only ones that you need to define are the string and the boolean here. Cool, that's the title and active. And then similarly, create the post migration and update it as follows. So the post migration, I already created mine and I've updated it. So the most important thing is foreign ID, user ID, constrained, and then cascade on delete. Cascade on delete just means if we delete this user, this post, their posts will be deleted too. So if we delete the category, the posts will be deleted as well. And then we have the string, which is the title, and then the body is a type of type text, and then the active is boolean, and which is nullable, or you can also put a default value there if you want. There's no difference because boolean and null is just the same thing. So as you may have noted, Laravel makes it easy to handle foreign keys in a less verbose manner. So this is greatly improving our productivity, and that's a good thing. And then next we need to create factories. So factories will help us to add some users, posts, and categories to the database. And to create a factory, like we said, PHP artisan make factory, and then the name of the factory, and you can specify the model. So if this creates the category factory and post factory um, inside the database factories directory, and then the model option allows us to specify a model to be created by the factory. So if you run this command, if you don't have the model, um, it's going to create the model, right? Cool. So now after creating the above two factories, it's time we define some data. So for instance, the content category factory should look like so. So if I go to, so we go to database factories and we can check our category factory. As you can see, we have the title and the active, so we don't need the ID because that is inserted in the database automatically. And as you can see, we have the faker property has so many methods that you can use to create many things. There's booleans, whatever. So you can check out the faker, right? So the faker PHP library, it has so many cool things that you can use to create different types of data. But for now, for the title, we'll just use a sentence with 3 words, and so that will be our category title, and the active will always be true. You can put whatever you want. So for our category factory, that's it. And then the post factory, we have the title as a sentence of 6 words. User ID, we just pull all the user ID, we plug the ID, all the users, and then we plug the ID, and we just we convert that to array. So if you don't know this yet, don't worry. It's just, you can just use it for now, and then later on we will be able to understand more about these eloquent methods. And then we have the category ID. So again, the same thing as we did for the user ID, we just pull all the users and then we plug the ID and we convert it to array, and then it just picks one item and it assigns it to the category ID. And then you have body, and then active, right? So very nice. All right, so after that, you have the user factory. This one ships with Laravel. So if you check here, there's the name, email verified at, password, and then remember token. So this password is just a hashed version of this word password. So after the name is created or whatever, you can just use this password thing, right? So you type this password and then it will be matched with this. So this is what is going to be stored in the database if you know about hashing. All right, so cool. Now, before we proceed, because at some point I realized that this creating the model this way was failing to create the model. So you can, if you can just check, if you go to your app models and you find that the models are not there, you can just create them using the command. So PHP artisan make model category, PHP artisan make model post. That is if they are missing, but if you find them there, the better. So the post factory, we already saw what there is in there, and we already checked it out. So yeah, so like I said, this function call just returns the array of user IDs, which faker picks one at random and assigns it as the value of the user ID elements. So if you'd like to learn more about eloquent methods, in the meantime, you can check the Laravel documentation, but we'll cover them a little bit later. Yeah. And then Now to the seeders, now after you create your factories like this, you still can't be able to use them until you create seeders. So seeders are the ones that are responsible for defining what we put in our database. So you just you call your factories in the seeders, and then you enter the data into the database. So we need this, so you can create the user seeder, you create the uh, category seeder, and then you create the post seeder, and you use the make seeder artisan command to do that. So just go ahead and do that. So after creating all those seeders, you can check your database seeders directory. So we start with the user seeder, and this is just the way you call them. So you have the model, so you use the app models user, and then factory times the number of times you want. If you want it to insert 20 users, you just put there 20, and then you finish it with the create method, just like that. And then post seeder again, models post, and then post factory times 10, then create. So this is going to create 10 posts in the database. And then category seeder, the same way, use app models category, and so you call the factory method, and then you define the number of times you want it to run, and then call the create method. So after doing that, and having all our seeders ready, now we need to call and run our seeders. So before we try to run our seeders, these are new classes that have been introduced, and when you create anytime you create new seeders, you need to run to regenerate the autoloader. Yeah, so to do that, you run composer dump outload. So you just do this composer dump outload in your inside your in your project root. So composer dump autoload is going to regenerate the autoload files and autoload our seeders. Otherwise, you'll run into errors. This and that seeder is not found. So yeah, so that's why it's important to rerun that. Cool. So after it's done like that, you can now open database seeders, then database seeder. So this one ships with Laravel by default. It's used just to call the database seeders. Yeah. So you just do this call and then an array of the seeders. So the hierarchy is important because the post seeder requires the user ID from the user seeder and the category ID from the categories database. So make sure that there is data inside those two first before you can try to load the seeder, because this, as we saw, so it's going to load an ID from the table and then reference that ID. So in case it doesn't exist, you're going to run into problems. So that's why you need these ones first, and then the one that depends on those last. Okay, cool. So that's it. So before we run our seeders, we need to ensure that our tables are created in the database. So let's go ahead and run our migrations first. PHP artisan, so migrate fresh. Cool. So we have all our tables migrated. So we did drop the tables and then we migrated them. So now we are free now to do PHP artisan migrate, sorry, db seed. Cool. So this output is what you're going to see in your command line, and then we can now play around with our created records. So now, in order to see because we don't have a UI, a user interface yet, we can play with our database data, but we need to use a tool called Tinker. So you can tinker with your application as you wish. So I think Tinker comes pre-installed in Laravel. So all you need to do is to run PHP artisan Tinker to start the Tinker shell. Cool, and you're going to see the output like that. So once you have that shell, this is what you'll see. So you can say user take2 get. So let's say we want to display to users, so we just say user take2 get, right, so it loads to users, it dumps them in the command line so that you can see, right. If you want to count the number of users, we just say user count. So to find the number of users in our table, you see it's 10. And if you remember what we did here, we actually in the seeder, user seeder, we created 10 users. So cool. The next is the same thing we can do for the categories. So category take2 get, cool, 2 categories, and then category count, you have 4 categories, right? And then the last one is post, cool. So 2 posts here, and you can see them, and then we can also count the posts. They should be 10. Cool. So you can see just by using the command line, you are able to insert data into the database without having to use a form or any other means. Yeah, so that's the power of Laravel's database API, and you can keep practicing. You can visit this you can read about more about this database thing in the Laravel documentation. Otherwise, thank you so much. So in our next lesson, we are going to see to run through Laravel's Eloquent ORM. So just to see how we can leverage this powerful tool to manage our data better in our next lesson, that is part 4. Otherwise, thank you so much for tuning in. See you in the next lesson.